Hello, friends. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our first live broadcast, so to speak, from Migrant Media together. And with me is Ken Fero. We are going to begin discussions on resistance, legacy, and our current work on the film of the Bradford 12, of which I was one of the central defendants, and Ken is one of the co founders of Migrant Media and has an unbroken history in making of resistant films. Thank you, Ken. And we have help from a long way off from where we are. We're both in England, and we have some technical support from Sweden. So if things go wrong, please bear with us. Clearly, things have gone wrong. We should now be seeing both myself and Ken now. I don't. Ken, just be patient with us. Ken's for using this for the first time.
Hello?
Ken, you need to put us both on. That's better. That's it. All right, Ken.
Hello, everybody. I'm not sure if anybody's watching this. We're just waiting for a code to come in. I don't know if there's any indication of people being there.
There's
Okay,
the code.
here's the code. Bear with us. I'll just put this now on the Facebook page.
Well, we're still sorting out some technical bits and pieces, and we find we're not sure if our friends are watching it, being able to see us or join us. So we're just checking those little bits of technicalities. Yes, I can see now that we're live on our events page, and we will take. So the idea for today, Ken, is I think we wait a few more minutes. If we The idea for today was to be able to discuss what the relationship between resistance and legacy is. What have you been doing? Why did you begin Migrant Media? And what was the importance, the difference between yourself and Migrant Media and the making of the films of resistance?
Okay, that's a lot of questions, Tariq, as usual. And I want to say hello to everybody. I know there's some people watching now, so we're just going to go through this. Hopefully others will join. I suppose we should start with some history of Migrant Media about why we were set up, because that's the beginning of the story that continues into the Bradford 12. Migrant Media was set up in about 1989 by myself, and Suleiman Garcia was involved, Kotaiba Janabi, many other people, Roya Solari, and other people who have now moved on and who are working in other parts of the world. We were politically active in our communities. Many of us were trying to help people in our different communities or working with different communities as well. And a lot of the need seemed to be to feed the media giants. Journalists were coming to us all the time and wanting to look into different issues, and their perspective on the issues that affected whether we were migrants or refugees or people within the Black or Asian communities, was stories of pain and suffering. And there was no doubt there was pain and suffering there, but there's something they never wanted to talk about, which was our very real experience, which was about resistance. And so Migrant Media was created to tell stories of resistance. And I think that's what we've done for the past 30 years. So that's how we began.
What were the projects that you initiated that came along, and how were they different from other companies who go for commissions and quickly make a film?
Yeah. Well, what we did initially was we followed the workshop movement. For people who don't know, the workshop movement, it grew actually out of the creation of Channel 4. There was a Greater Lambda Council who were funding workshops. Now, the workshop model is something which involves not just production, but distribution, screenings, and training, education. And that was a very important part of what we did. So initially, we set up lots of different training projects, which were not funded. They were self-funded, focusing on different groups. Migrant Media came in much later than the other groups like Black Audio Collective and Chedo and Retake and many of the other groups that were existed during the 80s and up to the beginning of the 90s. And so what we did is our focus was around how different communities, migrant, refugee, Black communities could work together. So the first thing we did was to have people who were part of the collective, who were mainly refugees, for example, from Iraq or from Palestine, to start courses for young filmmakers, young Iraqi filmmakers. And so people who became part of Migrant Media Collective came through the training programs. And so everything was all about how we connect the experience to train ourselves and then to make films. And the idea was not really about making films for the sake of it, as television does. That's the primary role of television, is just to make products. Our aim was to actually challenge the state, to be part of the resistance and the struggles that were there in the community. And that made it necessary for us to document without anything in mind in terms of making films. We simply wanted to document what was happening and to show what nobody else was willing to show. And so that process of working grew and grew and grew. We met up with a similar group in France, Agence Media, that was led by Mognis Abdallah. Their main focus was around the Beur movement. That's the young Algerians, particularly, who had come out of the generations of struggles in Algeria, second, third generation, who were making films about issues like police killings and immigration issues and deportations. So there was a very clear connection between us. And politically, in terms of how we made films, we were very close to them. So the first film we made was called Britain's Black Legacy, which is in fact a 30-year story of resistance in the Black community, looking at issues like mangrove and issues around racist attacks in East London, and how people over 30 or 40 years had organized together to fight racism in a community-based way. And that's the first time I met Tariq, because we found out about the Bradford 12, and it seemed then even to be quite unique in terms of the level of community involvement in the resistance. So that takes us back to 1991.
Can we see a little bit of the resistance legacy?
I think, well, if anyone wants to see the film, it's on Vimeo. It's on the strap that's running underneath us now. I think our
But
technical
perhaps,
people may be able to show a clip.
yeah, perhaps we can see a clip. Yeah.
Yeah. So while the clip is being found, and just in case it isn't found, I'll just keep talking. And I think Britain's Black Legacy and the series of films we made with Agence Media, which was Douce France, which was about the story of resistance to police killings in France, and the whole position in terms of how the political situation and how race and how racism was part of the big French political agenda. Race was central to the situation in terms of in France, the political situation, in a much more central way than it had been in the UK. It was very clear when we went over there that discussions around race, around crime, and around the criminalization of young Algerians was actually the core issue in terms of voting in general elections, and it wasn't the case like that in the early 90s in the UK. Um, and so that was a very interesting experience, and we learned a lot through working with the Agence Media, particularly around the importance of how to have a more long-term approach to filmmaking, which is something about how you engage with people and not just produce products for whatever's in fashion at the time.
To what extent did the Britain's Black legacy then feed into some of the other projects on which I started working with you?
Mm,
I think the first one was the Tasting Freedom, wasn't it? In about the refugees, or was
yeah,
it Anvardita?
I think I don't. You're going back a long way, so you're asking me to remember what's impossible because I think it's been a steady stream of work, unrelenting, never giving up, and each project moves from one project to the next. So clearly, after we made Britain's Black Legacy, we did a few commissions for Channel 4 because we'd proven to them through the work that we'd made, which was very powerful and was getting a lot of coverage, that we could do what they required us to do in terms of delivering high quality documentaries. But I think what happened after that is that we decided to refocus what we were doing in terms of the UK, because we'd worked in France and Germany and Italy with the Agence. And the situation in Britain was becoming really quite vicious at the time. And Tasting Freedom was a film that we made, which looked at the struggles of asylum seekers in detention centres in the UK. And even in making that film, um, even with the commission from Channel 4, what we did with that film was that we met with the community groups from Algeria and from the Congo at the time, Zaire, and we wanted to do something to see how we could make an intervention, a political intervention, in what was happening in the camps in the UK, because people were dying. Many people were being held in camps and in prisons for several years without any due process within the law. And what was happening in terms of the Conservative government at the time was that detention was being used as a deterrent. People were basically the politicians were using refugees as scapegoats. They were focusing on refugees and saying these are all criminals. So it's exactly the same narrative you have now, just as vicious as Priti Patel, just as vicious as Suella Braverman. There's nothing new in what's happening today than 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And at that time, we decided that the best way we could support the struggle was to speak to the refugees who were in Campsfield House in Oxford, who were in Pentonville prison. They were all across the country. There were thousands of people who were literally forgotten. And basically what we decided in this meeting with the community groups was that we would announce a hunger strike in the camps and in the detention centers. So the message went to the camps, the detention centers, and we were filming as that went along. So we were filming a film for Channel 4, sure, but at the same time, what we were doing was became the mouthpiece, the voice of the asylum seekers. So anything that happened inside, if there was people were nearly dying, or if there was a protest, because the resistance inside Campsfield House and prisons, and even today in all the detention centers, you see it explode every so often in the news. Something might catch fire or there could be a death. But that resistance inside the detention centers is there every single day in many, many ways. So what Migrant Media tried to do with that film was to put that voice out. And in fact, what happened with the film, it was shown on Channel 4 in a prime time slot. It was 9 o'clock on a weekday. And the reaction to the film was quite vicious in terms of the response. The government, though, at the time, were very embarrassed by the film going out. There was a huge call for an investigation. And in fact, I can't remember the number. I think it was around 600 people who had previously been incarcerated were released after the hunger strike, which really shows the power of the media and the power of what you can do if you take a stand. So I think that was the first film.
Well, I suppose that then links it, if I could move to Justice for Joy, that when you don't see the subject as an external process to the process of making the film, that you're integrated within the
Mm,
struggle of the very subject. So you yourself become the subject as much as the subject of the film. So, how does that then move to Justice for Joy? And how does that then, when me and you start working together much more,
yeah.
from the Tasting Freedom, that comes across? And when you mention the viciousness, that viciousness hasn't stopped. Perhaps we'll bring up to date to some of the younger ones who don't know what exactly we're talking about and how vicious the British state and its media outlets actually can be and
Mm.
are in our case.
Yeah. I mean, this is very, very complex. It involves film and culture and politics and legacy, and it involves hopes and dreams and pain. I mean, these are all things that we live through with families. And of course, when I say with families, for example, I'm referring to families of people who were killed by the police. We often had connections with people that have been killed. For instance, I went to school with Brian Douglas, who was murdered by the police in Clapham, which came a little bit later. But in terms of the story of Joy Gardner, when we made the film about detention, Joy Gardner had been killed whilst we were making the film. And what happened with the Joy Gardner case, and I think it's very important we talk about Joy Gardner, and there are many reasons for this. One of the reasons is that it happened 30 years ago on the 28th of July. This is the 30th anniversary. So very recently, we marked the death of Stephen Lawrence, and many people know about the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And yet, at the time, Joy Gardner had been killed 2 months later, and yet very, very little was being said about it. So when we met with Myrna Simpson, who's the mother of Joy Gardner, who is an incredible fighter for justice, uh, when you meet people and you spend time with people and you're going through a process of helping to run the campaign as well, because for us, it wasn't about just doing interviews. It was about documenting every single thing, many of the things that other people refuse to document. And
Let
that's
me just
because,
stop you there. You mentioned the word campaign, Ken.
yeah,
If I'm talking to you from Manchester, as you know,
yeah,
if someone is killed in a particular area, it's not necessary that we're going to find out what happened in that area. Because you were filming for Joy and filming about deaths in police custody, how did that affect bringing together of the people who were being killed? And how did that come across in their story if we go a little bit further into
yeah.
Joy
I mean,
Gardner and Injustice?
yeah, in terms of film resistance and legacy, this is what it's all about. The filmmaking process is happening, the resistance is happening, and we're part of both. Migrant Media is part of the film and part of the resistance. So we bring our own history and politics of anti-imperialism, of anti-colonialism, to the struggles of families, for example, in terms of police killings. When we met with Joy's mother and we heard about what had happened to Joy, we heard about how Joy had been brutalized by the police, how they smashed her door down at 6 o'clock in the morning to deport her to Jamaica, even though Myrna is part of the Windrush generation, how the police pulled the phone out of the wall to stop Joy phoning her lawyer, and how her 5-year-old son, Graham, who we're still in touch with today, witnessed the brutal murder of his mother. She had 13 feet of surgical tape wrapped around her face. She was put in body irons, in shackles, very similar to the images you see from the days of slavery. So this was a woman who was totally brutalized, murdered by the police. And the reaction of the state was, of course, to blame her. The reaction of the state and the media, and when I say the media, I mean all the media, even the liberal media, did not question Joy's killers. They tried to find a liberal excuse about why this happened. They started talking about um, improving systems of brutality at the end of the day. We were not interested in that. We simply wanted to tell the story of Joy, the story of Myrna, the story of Graham, and the wider family and the community as well. And as the Justice for Joy campaign began running, which was run by the late Bernie Grant and many other people in Haringey, we were also part of that campaign. And myself and Minka Adofo from the Black Unity Freedom Party, who we're still working with in many of the films since then, helped us help Myrna and help the campaign to go forward. So the parallel running of that family campaign together with the filmmaking led to Justice for Joy. And the lessons we learned in that were this. One, you have to have the humility to work with families and to listen to what they want to do. Because very often, what they want is much more radical than anything you could ever think of. They simply want the basic answer, the questions answered, and they want action. And the action they want is not mediated action. It doesn't have to be mediated by a liberal campaign group or an NGO or by a government body. It's very, very simple. They want the police officers in jail immediately. And so the story of working with Joy then led, well, I have to talk a little bit about the reaction to the film of Joy Gardner. It was commissioned by Channel 4.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you make a film for broadcast, and some people watching may understand this, you have to go through a process called compliance, where you negotiate with the broadcaster about what you can and can't say. And every single word and every single image of everything we ever look at on the television has been checked by lawyers. And this is the country we're living in. Everything has to be checked by lawyers, and they're looking for libel actions. They're looking about to make sure that people don't sue Channel 4. When we made the film, we
Just
showed
hold
it.
on, Ken. People are looking at me and hearing your voice. I just want them to know it's not my voice. Talat, brother, can you please put us both on? Yeah, carry on, Ken.
I think both of us at the same time would be better.
Yeah, it'd be easier. Otherwise, I'm not the most photogenic of creatures. Not to say you are, but if we go back on those points, I
Yeah.
think it's crucial for people to understand that the idea that we have a free press and is nonsense. Perhaps we could. We've got yes. Perhaps you could go back into it that we have a commissioning process. There is a legal override over everything that happens. How does it work?
It works like this. Compliance and the legal issues are tied to the funding. To get the funding, you have to be compliant. And compliance is when you bend down, when you kneel down. That's what compliance is. It's not called that for any, for any strange reason. We were compliant to a certain extent, but we had to fight for every single image and every single word in that film. For example, the film was made in the year after Joy Gardner was killed. 3 police officers actually went to trial for manslaughter at the Old Bailey, and we filmed that whole process as the campaign went on. What happened to the family? What were the community thinking? What were Black journalists thinking? What were activists thinking? What were people on the street thinking? We captured all of that. And we were trying to tell the story of the family, because the story of the family was missing everybody else in every single place. And the story of the family is very different to what people know and understand. Joy Gardner was demonized by the press. I don't want to repeat the kind of things that they said about her, but it was
Yeah.
usual tropes in terms of her strength and her viciousness. And so the language that the media use permeates everywhere. It goes into people's heads. People over a year are drip fed a steady toxic narrative about this person who deserves to die. So when
Yeah.
the film was shown on Channel 4, and I won't go into the details, but we had a lot of issues with Channel 4 in getting the film shown. Even the very name of the film, we wanted to call Justice Denied. And they said, no, you can't say that because justice has not been denied. They're looking at it from the legalistic point of view in terms of the courts. So we call the film Justice for Joy. If you imagine in a 52-minute film, even if you have to negotiate for the title, what you have to do for the rest of the film, I don't need to go into it. People can use their imagination. But what happened then is that the film was shown at 9 o'clock on a Monday evening. And the reaction to the film was absolutely vicious, toxic,
Yeah.
violent. Lots of emails and phone calls going into Channel 4 saying, this woman deserved to die. The filmmakers should be raped and murdered on their way home. It was absolutely incredible. And it's at the same time understandable, because if for a whole year, people in this country are told by the press, by the media, and even by the liberal media, this person deserved to die, then of course people are going to react like that. But Channel 4 decided, after we made that film, that we had a meeting with them. Behind our backs, they apologized to the police officers. Incidentally, the police officers were found not guilty on a Friday night, and our film went out on a Monday. So it was a very hard-hitting film. And it wasn't the narrative that had been put in every single newspaper. And Channel 4, we had a meeting, and they said this is at the time where Channel 4 was changing. Channel 4, when it started, had possibilities of radicalism. There were people making films about liberation struggles all over the world. They were looking at Latin America, they were looking at Africa. They weren't really looking at the Middle East and Palestine, because it wasn't the kind of narrative they wanted to look at. But nevertheless, this was what Channel 4 was. What it became after we made Justice for Joy, and I think I would say it's the last really radical film that was shown on Channel 4. Everything switched to housekeeping and how to decorate your house, and the kind of ridiculous things you see on Channel 4 at the moment.
But
And
it's not just Channel 4, it's a
no,
whole
it's across,
global phenomena.
it's a
It's a
global
global
phenomenon.
phenomenon.
Yeah,
It's a
but
global.
I think I particularly target Channel 4 because they try to take the language of radicalism. They say they're different. They are different. They are different from the BBC, but different in which way? So when we made Justice for Joy, they said, "Look, we like what you do, but you need to tone it down, essentially." And they
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
"If you want to do a series of films about how to decorate your home in an Arab style, then we'll talk to you." And of course, we stopped talking to them. And 7 years later, we made Injustice, which I think many
Well,
people know about.
perhaps if we have some time now, we can have a little trailer on it. And if we don't get a trailer, because Injustice, it took how long to make, Ken? Because there is a section in there, as you were talking about Manna Simpson. I still cannot forget. Maybe must have seen it hundreds and hundreds of times as we were editing it. In the her statement, my tears will catch them. I have cried almost every time I have seen that statement. I think she said it in a big public meeting in London. And so, the making of Injustice, firstly, what I was trying to ask you to explain was that because you were working on one death in custody, other deaths in custody that happened, you as filmmakers began the process of organizing the families. So from different parts of London and different parts of country into the United Friends and Family campaign. This being the campaign of the families of those who'd been killed in custody demanding justice. And how did that begin to reflect, that legacy of those families begin to reflect into injustice, and why could injustice never have been made from uh, on a commission, so to speak?
So I think this is important in terms of the Bradford 12 film about where we are today, because we have to address the story of the Bradford 12, even though we've mentioned our
We'll
very
come
first
to that. Yeah,
production. Yeah. So I think there are many things here that have to be said. The first is that when we made Justice Denied, we don't go out and look for stories. We are the story.
that's it.
People in Migrant Media were the story. We knew everybody. People knew us. When something would happen, they would call us, and we would go there. It wouldn't be the other way around. We never had to search for anything, because it was happening to us, to our people, and we were the people who were actually recording it when everybody else was ignoring it. And so, what happened naturally after Justice Denied was shown on Channel 4, and I have to say it's still on Channel 4 now. It's on all four if people want to watch it, and I can explain why that happened if I can remember later on. But I think the most important thing is this: is that Migrant Media is about filmmaking tied together with campaigning and political action to make change. And Jean-Luc Godard, the filmmaker, said something very important, which has always been part of our mantra. The question is not how to make political films, but how to make films politically. And they're two very different things. People
Yes.
can say they're making a political film because the subject is political, but that doesn't mean it's been made politically. When you make films politically, it's much harder. It's not accepted by the state. It's frowned upon by the industry, and yet it's the most honest and impactful and meaningful, long-lasting approach to filmmaking. And this way of working which we started with through Agence and through all the films up to Justice Denied and also into Injustice, is that the campaign that goes on and the filmmaking work hand in hand. And the history and legacy of everything in the campaign groups that were supporting the families, we were in conflict with to a certain extent. For example, police monitoring is not something that we politically agree with. And yet police monitoring groups were the people who were supporting individual families. Then there are a number of other groups, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Nation of Islam, individual activists within the community, and each of them would be supporting a family. But what they did with those families was that they would simply have them on a stage crying to tell their story of grief. And very often some of the campaigners would be writing those words for the families. And obviously that's dishonest apart from anything else. And also it keeps the real truth and the pain and the demands of the families, because they're asked, the campaign groups tend to mediate, the NGOs want to mediate with the state, and they forced families down this line. We weren't interested in that. And of course, everybody understands the basic slogan, unity is strength. And so what we did with the film is we went to different parts of London, we met with families, and we put the families together. Nobody had done that before, and they hadn't done it before because there was like a protectionism. They protected that family. They wouldn't let anybody near the family. And of course, we broke through all that. And as you mentioned, the making of Injustice went hand in hand with the creation of the United Families and Friends campaign, which became the only effective political family group that has ever been in this country in terms of police killings. And so people work, and for any filmmakers working, it is about not just choosing the subject, but what you do with yourself. It's a lifetime struggle. Learning through Injustice in terms of making the film, we were part of the Brian Douglas campaign, family campaign, and one of the people who were a strong supporter of that family was Hurlington Armstrong, who was part of the Black Panther Party linked to Race Today. And I remember very clearly now on a late evening, sitting down with him, myself, the families, other people from Migrant Media, we said, what can we do? What can we do to make a difference? And Hurley had been asked by the IRA to carry one of the coffins down Downing Street after the death of Bobby Sands. He and other people from the Black community and from other communities in struggle were asked by the brothers and sisters in Northern Ireland, by the IRA, to carry these symbolic coffins to Downing Street. And they marched from Trafalgar Square to Downing Street, and they had their protest there. And Hurlington said, we should do that. We should do that for the families. And so the reason I mentioned Hurlington, and there were many, many other people, activists, who were involved with Migrant Media and who supported us and who we worked with as well. Their stories of struggle, their stories of resistance, of anti-imperialism, of anti-colonialism, which goes back many, many, many decades, fed into our political approach. We call these, we don't use the word deaths in police custody, we call them police killings. We call them human rights abuses, and calling them human rights abuses came through watching Malcolm X at the United Nations when he said, why are you talking about civil rights when we don't even have human rights? How can people live if they're dead? How can they have freedom if they're dead? And so these very important influences fed into our politics, fed into the direction, and obviously fed into the families as well, and what the families wanted fed into what we were doing. So it's a long term. It took 7 years for Injustice to be made. And the result of it was quite incredible. I'm sure I don't need to go into it. If people haven't seen it, they can see it on our channel. But that involved, it involved working with, I'll stop talking now. Perhaps.
Yeah, and we never got paid a penny, in case somebody's wondering we made any money out of this. We, as a general rule, we don't get paid. But that's another story. This led to the reaction of the state as well. Whilst millions of people have seen it, we'll conclude on this and then move on with the thing, given that the reaction of both the state, i.e., the police, the media, the government, the judiciary, there was a reaction to the film, and it still holds today, that British television stations may, including Channel 4, may put on things called banned series, but they will not show injustice. Why?
I think we could spend the rest of the program doing that, but I'll keep it brief. I think what's interesting is that, you know, the story of making a film is sometimes just as important as the film itself. And I think in Injustice, that certainly is the case, and it has been documented in many places. I think the strategy we had for the film, because it was not funded by anybody, it was self-funded by very small amounts of support, but it had something which was invaluable. It had commitment. It had non-compromising attitudes. It had the love of the families. It had individuals and many, many people who felt it, who wanted the film to be made. So we made it quietly. We made it secretly, in a sense.
Mm.
We didn't tell anybody what we were doing. And when it came out, it had a massive, massive impact. As you know yourself, you were there. We
Yeah.
decided, okay, well, how do we present the film? Because filmmaking is not just about making a product. It's about what you do with it afterwards. And if people know about the third cinema movement, which is very, very important, which again fed into our approach, where you're making things, and this discussion and this talk here and people being able to ask us questions is part of that. It's a continuing process of developing your political aims and developing the creativity as well. When you go forward with that, you end up in a very different place to the mass audio-visual media, as Peter Watkins calls it, which constitutes not just UK terrestrial broadcasters, but streaming services as well, and of course Hollywood, and to a certain extent all the other woods as well. And I think the important thing is with this is that when the film, we decided, okay, we're going to release the film, and we had a political aim. The political aim was to get the police officers that had killed the people in the film into jail. We decided to show the faces of the police officers. We decided to name the police
Name.
officers. And so we intentionally broke the law of libel. And the reason we did that was this. The right to life is more important than any other law. And we wanted the right to life to be the discussion point. Of course, the state, including the Police Federation and broadcast and everybody else, didn't feel that way and tried to silence the film. And they tried to stop screenings. The first screening that we booked was in central London. And we decided, as you remember, Tariq, to invite all the embassies of countries that Britain had accused of human rights abuses, because the sheer hypocrisy of this country killing its own people and not even regarding those as human rights abuses is something that still happens today. And we wanted to break through that. So we invited, and many of them came from Iran, Cuba, from different countries. And they sat down to watch the film together with the families who had been silenced for many, many years. And just as an aside, we decided not to interview police officers. And we were criticized for that. And our answer to that was this film is 98 minutes. You've had 30 years of the police point of view. So you're right, it's very imbalanced. It's imbalanced against the families. But what happened at that screening is that police officers decided that we had named, decided to take legal action. They threatened the cinema, the police threatened them. And then that took a very long struggle of around 3 months of us running up and down the country, having secret screenings. And eventually, as you remember, Tariq, you and I were invited to show the film to the police officers we'd accused of murder. And we were blindfolded and driven around to the office. We watched them see the film. And our strategy then had been this, that we would take them to court because of loss of earnings, because they had stopped all the screenings. We weren't interested in the earnings. We were interested in getting them into court, which is what they'd avoided all the way down the line. And of course, all these police officers who had been accused of murder and manslaughter decided not to take any action. Channel 4, still at the time, refused to show the film. And I'm going to now jump 20 years. Making films for us is something which is not just about the creative process, it's the political process. And I think as we went on and on, it became clear what we needed to do. We, in the meantime, since 2001, when Injustice was released, kept making films. We worked for Press TV, we worked for other organizations. We had an international presence and an international way of working. And so we kept making films, supporting families and different family campaigns. And it was only until the death of George Floyd, and today we have to remember it's the 3rd anniversary of the murder, the execution of George Floyd. After George Floyd was killed, suddenly something changed in this country. Suddenly, all these organizations wanted to deal with the issue of racism. They wanted to deal with the colonialism. They call it something else. I can't remember what they called it. But so we decided to go to Channel 4. I think around a year ago or a bit longer, and said, look, you banned the film 20 years ago, but now the situation has changed. And we asked them whether they would show Channel 4. And there are individuals within Channel 4 who are actually quite progressive. And we met somebody who was very keen to show the film, and who said it was it is a powerful film. They were prevented from showing the film by the hierarchy at Channel 4. They were told, well, we know about this issue. We're going to make a film about it. So the question that I asked them is, if you show films about baking every day, if you show films about people stripping naked, walking through the Scottish Highlands, or the kind of nonsense you see on Channel 4 and all the other channels today, why is it that you can only have one film about police killings? Of course, it's an excuse, but I would go further than that. I would say this: if Channel 4 had shown Injustice in 2001, after we defeated the police, after the whole country had heard about this issue, and there were so many people that came out to show the film, they would show it in a club, in a school, in a pub. Whenever the police tried to stop the film, then somebody would show it that same night. And the police understood that they couldn't kill the film. They tried to kill Injustice in the way they killed the people within the film and many other people, and they couldn't. And so when we did that, it was something important. But Channel 4 still decided not to show the film. And fundamentally, my belief is this: is that there are people who have been killed since 2001 in this country who could still be alive if Channel 4 had been brave enough to show the film. They were probably remembering when you and I, Tariq, and many other people on a May Day, 2 years after the film was released, decided to show the film on Channel 4 ourselves. And we took a generator and a projector, and we projected it onto the side of Channel 4. So the film was shown on Channel 4, but not in the usual way.
No, but perhaps no, that's true, and you know how to make friends anyway, Ken. So perhaps it's time to move a little bit. Following that, we've had some comments and questions on the chat, and we'll try to deal with those in the last. Thank you, Sukant, and Javed and Peter, and we can try to deal with some of those at the end of our discussion. Well, this really brings us to the next point, that the old African proverb, Ken, which has kept me going, and that is that if the lion doesn't tell its story, it becomes the story of the hunter. In a sense, it's not simply the question of what the story is told, like you said, but how it's made. It's who tells that story and when that story is told. So, in a sense, we've been discussing and developing different components of the idea of the Bradford 12. For those who don't know, I'm one of the central defendants from the Bradford 12 case, and we have for a very long time been trying to find ways to tell the story, and we now well into the making of a film, and with a lot of support of friends and family from the time. So, what's the difference between us trying to do this sort of stuff and somebody else trying to tell the stories? What never happened in Injustice, that the time that you saw people making short films about deaths in custody at the time, what they called them, It wasn't the voice of the people, it was the voice of the filmmaker which dominated the narrative. In that sense, ours was a very similar legacy. We didn't care about the legal requirements because sometimes when we are engaged in political struggle, the law has left no doors open. And when the law doesn't leave you a door open, what do? You can try to walk around the door, but it's fenced. You can try to go around the other side, and there's dogs. You have to smash through the door. You have to find new avenues and new things through which you can tell your story. And in that sense, our logical journey, in a sense, from over the last 30 years has come to this point that we've reached the story of an era, of a story of our lives. And we'd like to those who listen to try to understand why we are discussing it in the process of production is because that's what we do. Our production is not separate. It doesn't come out at the end. It's a process. So our work will begin on the day we release the film. It won't end on the day we will release the film. That we want to make a film that looks at legacy not as something that happened in the past, but that's happening right now, and it's going to happen in the future, unless we can use the tools of the past to resist for the future, which means rebuilding the organizations, the infrastructure. And one of the things that I think, if we have a look at some of the questions, please, that you can see that there is a need of the time. And what's the need of the time? What are the issues that the Bradford 12 film will address? We invite most of the people watching, I should imagine, have already been in discussion. The obvious is there, the story is there, out in the public domain. But what's not out there is how that voice should be presented. So, whilst we are engaged, we're a long way in the film, whilst we are engaged in the process of production, we are hoping to expand those processes of production to also include creative aspects. Do you want to say a few words on that as well?
I think how we've talked about how we work in terms of filmmaking, in terms of political action and how the two things come together are really very relevant to the story of the Bradford 12. The difference, of course, is that within the stories of all the films up to this stage, we've been part of the struggle at the time, and we filmed the struggle at the time. With this film, it's very much about looking back, about the legacy, as you said. But of course, legacy has to be shared in very, very specific ways. It's simply not enough to show your film, whether it's on television or on Netflix or in cinemas. And so every screening that we will be making with this film will include Q&A sessions with a whole range of people who have been involved in the film, who are participants in the film, but also their families, also other people who are dealing with the issues that we will focus on in this film. And the issues we focus in this film will only be known when we release the film. And the reason for that is very, very clear. And it's been our experience all the way through Migrant Media. You don't speak about what you're doing until you're ready to go, because the state, in all its different functions, will try everything it can to dilute, to suppress, and to prevent. And so we have to be very careful what we say. But we can say this certainly. In terms of third cinema, in terms of how cinema was used in revolutionary Russia, after the revolution, there was a whole country who were illiterate, largely illiterate. They had to find a way to connect with people, and film was the perfect way of doing it, because everybody can read an image. You don't need interpretation. You don't need to read. Yeah. And so they didn't produce leaflets and pamphlets. They produced films. And what they did is they went along on a train and they made films and they showed it at the next village, at the next city, and they made more and more and more. And it's essentially Migrant Media for the past 30 years has been doing that, moving, making, showing. And so with the Bradford 12, we're at a critical point in this country where young people are, for the first time, in my opinion, for many, many years, becoming much more radical, much more organized. And we want this film to be part of that struggle, part of that resistance. Whether you want to fight for a better planet, whether you want to fight for your identity, whether
Yeah,
you want to
yeah.
fight for anything else, film can be part of that tool. So make it part of that tool, but own it. Don't let other people tell your stories. Tell them yourself, and tell them in a political way.
This is always historically the issue that we faced with. As I said before, if the lion doesn't tell its story, it becomes the story of the hunter, and the hunters come in many guises. I think over the last few years, I think I've had 1 to 2 approaches per week from somebody looking for ideas, trying to make a film on the Bradford 12. I mean, from all over the place, actually. And invariably, they're looking for a job, they're looking for a bit of money, a little bit of name, build their name. They'll have gone. It'll be the value of it will be how valuable a head wound is. Perhaps, Talat, if you can help us now to deal with some of the questions or statements people have made, and if there are friends who want to pose direct questions to us in the last 10 minutes or so. I know we were a bit late when we began, and we're struggling with the technology. We'll endeavor to comment. And there were some comments by Sukant and others. If you pose the questions in, we'll have a go. I'm sorry we haven't got a system of asking for voice input. You can type into YouTube and it'll come on for us, or you can type into Facebook and we'll get it. So Sukant says, you'll have to read. I'm dyslexic.
Yes, I agree. I mean, Sukkant, there's no debate. We're in a different time, and I think one of the issues in terms of what you're saying and is how do we deal with this? How do we deal with it with the tools we have today? What's the difference? I mean, if you look at the difference between 68, for example, which was a very, very important political struggle at the time, you had Vietnam, you had the Black Panthers, yeah, you had all these different, and you had people who are struggling on the streets. Now, what's the difference today? We have Iraq, we have Syria, we have Palestine, we have the movement that we have movements around racism and anti-colonialism. It's all there, and so the important thing is how we make those stories and struggles of the past fit in to the struggles for today. And it's very clear. There's a clear line of filmmaking. There's a clear line of resistance. There's a clear line of unity of people working together. And we have to rub away and throw away some of the attempts to suppress us. The use of our language, the use of our words, the use of our images is all part of the state co-opting. If you go back to Joy Gardner and to Stephen Lawrence, you know, Joy was killed 3 months after Stephen. There's no Joy Gardner Day. There's no institution for Joy Gardner. And it's not just about Joy. It's about Brian Douglas, Ibrahim Assay. It's about Tuni Hassan. It's about many, many others, 2,000 that have been killed. What about them? So we have to go back and pull all of these through. We have to make sure that people are aware of them. And we have to use the tools of today. We have to use TikTok. We have to use all these things because
Yeah,
young
yeah.
people are using them. But it's about how to make that connection. And the most important thing is this: what is our political ambition? What is our target? If you don't go for the throat, you're going to lose. And
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Migrant Media is all about taking direct action and trying to push the struggle forward. We have to think about what we leave behind and how people move forward after this.
Yeah, I think that I think Savi made a point a minute ago that there's some magic as well, Ken, in reflecting. Thank you, Savi. Reflecting back in Bradford is not that far away. It depends where you're. For people living away, it's all relative. But the important thing for us is that we invite you, come work with us afterwards. If you want to be involved in making a film, write to us. We're not send us a message and we'll follow it through. There's lots and lots we can do in many ways. We have to look at that the eras, as Ken has been talking here, are not that different. We live in terrible times of racist onslaught, terrible times of war. We feel helpless in as individual. Our stories are not individual stories. Our stories are stories of an era, as was the past, as is the present. So, in a sense, come and join us, come work with us. And work with us is not a job offer, incidentally. We don't have any, we work because we believe in trying to create a just world today. When I think back to the period here, it's always causing me pain. There is a living issue that hasn't been resolved. And yes, Sukant, the issue of looking at the difference of today, and then it's always the question. But today and yesterday are not separated. There's no, at least we have the same word in our languages for yesterday and tomorrow, which is kal. There's an organic relationship between the time of the past. So, what do? We will tell our story. Ours will be a story of our legacy in our words, uncaring about how to be nice to the powers that be. They've never been nice to us, they've put us down. We will create a film that, like Injustice, like the previous work, will live. It will live, its words will live, a- as a legacy to the of the present and the past for the future generations. And one of the things that I certainly learned each time Injustice was screened and I went over, I think there was never a time that I didn't cry watching the film again and again and again, in whether it be in Liverpool, sitting on the floor in a derelict building with hundreds of Liverpudlians, or whether it be in Manchester again with hundreds, or watching it in millions in some places when it's broadcast on national TVs. And it still brings me back to this bad feeling in my gut that the powers that be own the social media, they will not let the story of those who have suffered be told in their words without having to go through a system of self editing and the self editing or kowtowing to them. Ours should be the story as we would tell it. And Peter, these are complex questions. The issues of style, we are working with it. And ours is much more. We have a lot of people, young people, old people as old as yourself as well, that, who will be coming along and giving us questions of artwork, of all sorts of stuff. And we are holding a whole series of processes to be able to make the film. And you, of course, are welcome to join them, and I'm sure you will be there.
I think it's important to mention. I know we're running out of time, and I don't know whether this is still running. I was talking about Joy Gardner and about Stephen Lawrence. Nobody cared in television about Stephen Lawrence until the Lawrence inquiry. Nobody cared about the people before Stephen, like Roland Adams, like Akbar Ullah, like everybody else that had been killed by racists and fascists on the streets. It was only when the Labour government, for their own political purposes, to co-opt uh, the some of the movement that had been out there, that the Lawrence inquiry took place. That was the only reason. It was in the interest of the state at that time to do that. It wasn't because of the pressure from the streets at all. And I think that's very important, that people realize that issues will only be dealt with when the change politically comes from below. Because if it comes from above, there will be no change, as there has been in terms of police killings. Even with George Floyd, we are still very far away from moving forward on this issue. So I think these stories of resistance, like the Bradford 12, particularly how it was organized, by whom and why, and what the result was, is a very important lesson for young people. And in terms of the questions of the Bradford 12, yes, Stuart Hall is absolutely right. It is part of our approach or our philosophy. And this is what we're doing this talk. And that's why we're talking to people about becoming involved in not just the making of the film, which is ongoing now, but in terms of its distribution and what we do with it. If you spend a long time making a weapon, you have to use it very carefully afterwards. And essentially, that's what we're going to do with the film, with everybody's support. And thank you for all your comments. Fero's Bradford 12 is still in production, but you can see all our other films on the Vimeo site, which is running underneath. And please spread around these films as well, because I think even now, after 20 years, Injustice is still having screenings. I still go with the families to talk, to mobilize, to organize. We're still using film, whether it's ultraviolence and the plans we have for the People's Tribunal on police killings next year. All these things are happening. If people want to get involved, they certainly can.
And I think we'll stop now, and we'll thank from me as well. I'm sorry we've had a lot of technical issues, and we did our best to try to come across that the film is ongoing. I'm deeply into a book on the Bradford 12 that should be done by the time the film is ready. And we have other projects associated with it under development as well. So if you want to be involved, you want to support us, how to do it, please leave a message and we'll do our best to find a way of working with you. Otherwise, always remember your story is as important as any story ever told. You have an ability to tell it. The world needs to know it, and don't let others tell it for you. Be safe, be well, and thank you for joining us.
And thanks, Talab, for your support in setting this up. We'll be doing this again, and we'll see
And
you again.
hopefully you'll be a bit better by then, Ken. I mean, hopefully with the technical side, at least you could manage some of
I
the
don't want to go
controls.
into how poor your image is. Your head
Yeah,
room.
but it's still live, incidentally. You're